Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am with Stephanie Izquieta, who is the events content manager at Coindesk. And Stephanie, I am so glad you're here because, like we were saying right before the session began, this is the big issue in content marketing. How do you handle events? And you at Coindesk put on Consensus, and which is a huge conference. Could you tell the audience uh, just how big the conference is, just to give them a sense of the work that you do?
Sure. So our peak year was 2018. We had about 8,000, 9,000 attendees in person. That was the first year that Bitcoin hit 20,000. So everyone was trying to understand what was going on, why this, internet money was this fake magical internet money was being valued at so highly. So that was the year that I forget which publication covered it and said that the Lambos were out because there was literally people who rented Lambos just to like show off at this conference. And then virtually, our first year that we did a virtual conference, which is 2020, everyone pivoted. We had about 20,000 people attended virtually. So it's been a lot.
Phenomenal. And I want Lambos at next year's Managing Editor Live. One of the things, we actually met at an event when I was at Common Bond, and I forget exactly what it was. I think it was like about product management. And we kept in touch. And I think that you have like a fascinating career path. I mean, you worked in tech, you worked in cannabis, and now you're at CoinDesk with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general. And so thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about what the future of multiversal experiences are. And in this session, you're going to learn how to develop an approach to creating events that boost engagement and leave people wanting more. And I think Stephanie is perfectly positioned to really lay out what is the future of the events landscape in terms of content, in terms of programming looks like. So let's start at the beginning, Stephanie. And can you tell me what drew you to events work?
Sure. So I think for starters, in a sense, the practicality of it. I studied philosophy in college, which, to my parents' disbelief, is probably not the most practical career major. But it taught me really how to write. It taught me how to think clearly. It taught me how to really see both sides of an argument. So then that kind of naturally, like I've always been a voracious reader. That was something my mom instilled in me. So I actually was part of a civics class, an AP government class in high school. That part of our assigned task was to read a lot to understand what was going on in the world. So that I kind of picked up that habit there, and then I took that on to college. And in college, I met a friend who organized TEDx events, and I was just at that time, I think it was 2011-ish, 2012. TEDx was at like the height of prominence, so to speak. Everyone either wanted to do a TED talk or organize a TEDx event. So I just read a lot, different topics, technology, politics, food, anything. I just absorbed it. And so he was graduating, so we became friends, and he just was, he basically was like, would you like to take this on after I leave? And it was just like a natural fit. Studying philosophy, I like talking about a lot of different things. And by nature, philosophy is something that's face to face. Like that's the beauty of being in a philosophy classroom. Like you can read about it, but you're supposed to discuss it and think about it and have these deep conversation of what it is that you read and why is it ethical, why is it unethical, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got into events. I started being a TEDx organizer with a group of 2 other people, and then from there, I think that was my sophomore year of college, and I never looked back.
Excellent. Before I get to the next question, do you have a favorite philosopher? I know I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't talk about this one.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. I guess he's not technically categorized as a philosopher, but Naval Ravikant, He founded Angel, and he's looked at as a modern philosopher of sorts. A lot of tech people follow him, but I really like the way he presents information, and just, you know, he has a great podcast series on how to get rich, and it's very like simple basics. It's nothing like, you know, people, money is, and I think that's why, like crypto, money is seen as this mythology, almost like this mystic thing that is really hard to understand, but it's kind of just, you know, breaking it down to its fundamentals, and you kind of understand the basics of the game, because money is a game in a sense.
Love it. So segueing into can you talk to everybody about like, what is your philosophy when it comes to events content?
I read a lot. I mean, these days I kind of focus on crypto because that's just the niche I'm in. But my philosophy would be, you know, try to read outside of what it is that you're trying to produce, just because I don't know if anyone watches Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like, there's that scene where Charlie's like mapping out all these connections, right? And like, I think that's a good content producer is able to do that, synthesize and map out connections across different verticals, across different industries, because in to some degree, I think certain topics overlap. So I tend to just try to read as much as obviously in my field, but try to read outside of it to get inspired, get new ideas, see how the rest of the world is functioning while I'm in my little internet money world.
That's great. Could you talk about what is the workflow of your typical day like? I mean, how, like, Consensus is a huge event. Could you just talk about like the planning of it and what your role is? And I know you were just on a conference with a bunch of trying to get a couple senators to come to Consensus. So could you just talk about the planning and your day-to-day workflow?
Sure. So the beginning of my day, and I want to say like literally the beginning as I wake up, because I have Twitter alarms on for specific people, is to see what they've been tweeting about. So I read a lot. Twitter, that's kind of like, I don't want to say my source of truth because it's obviously social media, but a lot of people put out great content on Twitter. So I follow a lot of, like, I guess, the influencers of the industry. I read a lot of newsletters. I mean, it's a nice way to just get the, you know, the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of what the news is for the day or for the week. And then obviously I read news sites. And then obviously I read the core crypto publications, and then I have to read outside of that, like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, to see what mainstream media is talking about my industry, and then podcasts. But I do want to say that with all that, I have to carve out time in which I'm not trying to actively consume that much content when it comes to crypto, and I'm actually just passively enjoying things, because otherwise I feel like it's happened to me in cannabis, where it's like you kind of lose the joy of it a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying for that not to happen in this space for me.
That makes sense. Can we talk about your tactics and tips in terms of producing events content? Do you have any particular tools that you are fond of?
So I think Twitter is a great resource to just get ideas of what your audience is actually talking about, what they're interested in. And I think it's also a great place to view trends. I think tools for me to actually help organize all these ideas. Airtable, I used to not be a fan of it, just because I don't know, I found it complex, but once I got the hang of it, it's just it's like Excel on steroids. It's such a great tool to just like map out everything you need to just put a program together, right? So it allows me to just visually see where I'm placing certain speakers, where I'm placing certain themes, conversations, and then also it's a great collaborative tool where everyone in your team or company, what have you, can see in one place where where the content is. They can see where the sponsors are. It has tabs. It's just an awesome tool that I'm so glad that the previous head of events at my company implemented. And it's ironic because I was so against it at first, and then once I actually utilized it, I was like, I don't know how we could run an event without it.
So what advice would you give our audience who's thinking through events content? Like, if you had to boil down your advice or strategy into one thing that they could do, what would that be?
If you're looking for someone to produce this events, like, just get someone who's curious. And like, I think sometimes we sometimes people put more emphasis on like, has this person done this role before, over does this person have the curiosity and the tenacity to put a program together, and what is their hustle? Because sometimes there's people who've done this type of role in previous places and they just are very comfortable doing the same thing. You should be looking for the type of person, or you yourself should become the type of person who's willing to get outside the mold, experiment, and not be afraid to be wrong, right? Like especially in the year and a half that we've had through COVID, we've all had to experiment with a lot of things, where we didn't know if it was gonna, if we were gonna get a return of our investment, if this was the right decision. But like the saying goes, high risk, high reward. And that's some of the things we pulled off at Consensus this year, right? We pulled off something called Desk Coin, which was a non-tradable token, basically, that we gamified, where we would drop it in some of our virtual conversations and people were able to redeem it for these NFTs that we created on all like in-house kind of platform. And people were really engaged. We actually saw the highest engagement ever in our virtual experience because of Desk. And again, we didn't know if it was going to be successful. We didn't even know if it was going to fully work by the time the event was going to take place, but we took that risk and it paid off.
That's so cool. What are the biggest mistakes you see brands or organizations making when it comes to producing events?
I think sometimes just because it worked for your competitor doesn't mean it works for you. And I think just really honing in on what it is that you're good at, you should just champion that. Like, I'm a big believer that there's, we can throw so many ideas and see what sticks, but really I'm a believer of three, right? Like, do three things really well, and that's what people are going to remember you for. If you try to do 10 things, the likelihood of you executing all of them well is pretty low, just because given, how much time it takes to get, especially if experiential, excuse me, it just takes so much time to like see if the idea is even going to work, if the audience even has an appetite for it. So I think just sticking to that. And then also, like, trust is such a tough thing to build, and once you lose it, it's hard to get people to get back on board. I mean, we saw that a great example is Robinhood within the last year. A lot of people saw Robinhood as their first entry point into trading stocks, myself included. That was the first, before E-Trade, before Charles Schwab, that was my first introduction to buying assets, right? Like Robinhood. But what happened in the last year with the whole GameStop controversy and the AMC controversy, right? Like the big squeezes that happened within the last year, and them kind of halting trading on it, they lost a lot of customers and they lost a lot of their brand reputation, which is something that took them years to build. And in an instant, they it's obviously it's still there, but a lot of people went to a different platform because they just didn't like what they were doing.
That is, and Diana in our audience says, I mean, that's a wonderful example about a trusted relationship, and I couldn't agree with her more. What, in terms of like the future of events content, I feel like you are so well positioned just in the nature of like your background in the industries that you've worked in. It seems like you're very much on the like bleeding edge. So without stealing any of the thunder of your presentation here, what, like, high level, where do you see the future of events content
going? I think most event content, whatever industry you kind of partake in, you have to have just high conviction on what it is you're producing. I think content will look like almost a conversation, more like, right, there's this conversation around in my world, right, in crypto, where it's like Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. Web 1 was just reading the internet, right? Web 2, which is like Facebook, social media, was more like you interacting with the internet, right? And Web 3 is going to be this conversation of you reading, writing, but also building on top of the internet. And I think that's the next iteration of event content, where we're going to begin seeing the audience wanting to almost take part in the production of what's taking place, of the content that's being put forth. And there's this book that was written by Alexis Ohanian, co-founder of Reddit, founder of 776 Fund. He wrote it years ago, right? It's Without Your Permission. And he pretty much predicted in some ways this future where creators are going to do it with or without you, and you have to become able to be flexible and adapt with the changing times. And like, I'm sure event content producers know this. At least for my team, sometimes we're literally revamping or changing pieces of the agenda literally right up until the day before the event. And that's something that, depending on your industry, you have to be good at, and just roll with the punches, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, I know we'll have a couple more questions for you after your presentation, but I just want you to jump in and talk about multiversal events and sort of why we should be doubling down on this. So,
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
I will join for Q&A at the end. Thank you.
All right, no problem. Thanks, Tom. So Mirror World, doubling down on multiversal events. So I want to start off with hybrid events are not the future. They're the now. I think the idea that what do the future of events look like, and then, the obvious answer, hybrid, is no longer a question of, is this going to happen? It's already happening. The fact that we're having this conversation to begin with means that we're, light years of where we were pre-COVID. I think, or not, I know COVID accelerated a lot of phenomenons that people thought wouldn't happen until 10 years. It kind of just shortened that time span. And, this is just a statistic that was done by Event Manager Blog /Skiff, just asking, through a survey in their virtual event tech guide, will content people event organizers try to keep their live audience or, virtual audience when they go back to live events? And obviously, yes, before COVID, most people just saw live events, or virtual events, as this streaming opportunity, right? That you can sell, that you can market, get a sponsor to book the cost, etc. But now we've come to realize that it's not just a passive experience. We have to actually have some kind of active experiential end to it. And I think in the last year and a half, all event organizers have been trying to figure out that question. But that being said, although I think the future of events although I think the hybrid is the presence of events, it's not without problems, right? And I'm sure everyone in this audience experienced that. There's lower attendee engagement due to the complexities of networking in virtual audiences. There's problems in trying to find the right platform. I actually like this platform. They were using Big Markers, actually pretty nice. I hadn't used it before, but every platform has something great and then something that it falls short on. And I think as an event organizer, it's always our jobs to figure out what's the best platform meeting most of our needs. And obviously, I think there hasn't been one that does it all. But I'm looking forward to a platform that figures it all out. And trust me, I've gone through quite a few of them with my team. And then I guess I want to start off the part of the metaversal conversation, right? Is a lot of people are, and don't get me wrong, I love live events. I go to live music all the time. That was the thing that was killing me during COVID, that I wasn't able to go to live music. I'm a big music fan. That's what I did most of my early 20s. And then having that kind of taken away from me was just very shocking. But I want to encourage people to remember what every time when you become a Luddite towards change, what happens, right? And this is just a funny cartoon, comic book that I found, right? When Socrates was against writing, right? He saw that as almost beneath human beings, right? Like in his thought process, it was more important for an individual to have these face-to-face conversations, which I agree they're important, but the reality is, as much as we talk to each other and gain information, it's hard to retain it all and not forget things. So he was against writing, which is ironic because the only reason we know about him is because people Plato wrote about him. That's the only reason we remember any of his teachings, as wise as they were. So, it goes to show you, and it's a little funny, but it goes to show you, you should become even if maybe you won't use it today, just knowing a little bit of what this technology does is important. Because it will probably be, stick around. So the metaverse is this really huge buzzword that's been taking place. I want to say in the last few months. Like in crypto, it was a much more common word over the last year. And I think that crypto was maybe one of the first spaces that once COVID hit, they started really talking about the metaverse, talking about VR, talking about what a world in which we interact only online looks like, because a lot of crypto has been built with people never having face-to-face time. And it's solely done through the internet. So I think that specific niche of people were just very well versed and equipped to take on a world where you couldn't see each other because of COVID. And I also want to remind people that these communities or these metaverses aren't really that new in a sense. So this is like a LAN party. I'm maybe a little too young for these, but I know of some of my older friends that participated in these right LAN parties. You would literally physically take your huge computer, right, which wasn't a laptop back in the 90s and early 2000s. It was this clunky desktop tower, and you would go to one person's house and bring all your computers and play these games, whether it was WoW, whether it was League of Legends, what have you, and connect. And just these were LAN parties back in the day. So these communities of these online internet communities have kind of always existed, but they just keep getting I guess more sophisticated in a sense, because you don't now when you see people playing video games or doing something interactively online, they're not lugging their computer from point A to point B. They just log on the same way you guys are logging on to the internet and watching a presentation or watching Netflix together or playing a video game together. And I want to, so for people who talk about the metaverse, there's two, I think, big entry points, right? And Neil Stephenson was the first person to really coin the term in his book Snow Crash. And then so that's one generation of people that learned about the metaverse. Like that's the first half of it, right? I'm more of the later half of it that learned about the metaverse, the concept of it through Ready Player One, which is a book, but also got adapted into the film by Steven Spielberg. You guys should watch it. It's fun. You can watch it with your kids. It's a great vision onto what I think not only events, but really what our work life will look like in the future. Yeah, Diana, Ready Player One's a great book and movie. So this is this picture is kind of an illustration of how we actually live our lives today. Obviously, there's not a full-fledged metaverse right now. There's concepts of it, right? There's Oculus VR. There's the sets that kind of bring you into the metaverse, and there's a few platforms from AltSpace VR to VR chat that exist for you to interact in this metaverse-like experience. But I guess I want you guys to realize through this image is that we kind of already live in it. I like to say it's a 2D metaverse versus a 3D metaverse, where you can be, and I'm sure you guys experience this, right? When you can be at dinner or on the couch watching something or eating with someone, and they're in two places at once, right? Because they're on their phone. Yes, it's rude. I do want to acknowledge that, but it's a reality. People live in two worlds at once. And my long theory is that at one point, these worlds they're already blending, but they're going to further blend. And, you know, what's evident of that is, or one of the early evidence of that, right, is our social media presence. We all have some kind of public image that we uphold on the internet, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, etc., Instagram. But these are extensions of ourselves that live on the internet, and that we make, you know, there's people who literally his whole job is to to take care of someone's online persona on the internet, but we ourselves do that every single day. And I just wanted to make that visual possible, so you guys understand that the metaverse has kind of always been there in the background lurking. It's just now that we have the technology and frankly the internet speed to get it to where some of these sci-fi books and movies talked about. And this guy, I'm sure you guys remember him. I know he's wearing a different color shirt. He's usually wearing gray, but Mark Zuckerberg, founder and CEO of Facebook, this year announced that Facebook is no longer a social media company, it's a metaverse company. So I just, and I put him there, not because I necessarily agree entirely with his approach to the metaverse, because this is a longer conversation, right? There's an open source metaverse and a closed source metaverse. And most likely, given what Facebook is, it'll be closed source. But he is pivoted or is pivoting his company to be a metaverse company. So, my money is on the guy who is really, really rich, already has one of the most successful, powerful companies in the world, right? He's at Congress, I feel like every other week or so, debating as to whether Facebook is too big to fail, etc. And he's pivoted, and it's because he understands that this is the direction that the world is taking, right? Maybe back in like early 2011, some of us were like hesitant about social media or thought it wasn't going to get as far as it has today. But I mean, if we look at just the history of social media, both in terms of users, to the money it's made, to ads, to how it's changed content, how it's changed newsrooms. I can only imagine what the metaverse is going to do to all of that plus more. So that being said, I there's this quote that it's also a podcast, but this quote that Alexis Ohanian said, right? Now everything is community. If companies don't have a community event strategy, they better get one, because community-led companies are the future, and community can create a competitive advantage. And I guess I'm juxtapositioning that and applying that messaging not to just companies, but to events. If your event doesn't have a community event strategy, you need to get one, and you need to figure out how to apply it, who your community is, who are your champions. And obviously we know who are the influencers, who, marketing takes care of that, who are people that are always talking about your brand. But it's not just these one influencers, right? Because these influencers also have followers, which is their community. And I think creators of this generation really understand that they have a lot more power than the big brands. And in some cases, the individuals have more power than the brand. And these are just examples of how some companies have been able to leverage their community as well as find these amazing partnerships. This is a picture of Travis Scott having a concert during COVID. I forget what month of COVID, but I think this was maybe later half of 2020. And he had this full-blown concert in Fortnite. And for those that may not know, Fortnite is this free game that's, I think, available on most console systems as well as PC, and you can play. It's free to play. I think how they get money is that people buy like downloadable content to add to their players and enhance their players. But they hosted this music event, and it got almost 1 million people to participate in Fortnite. And I'm sure there was people who were not Fortnite players but participated solely because they like Travis Scott. They thought it was cool, innovative to have a concert in this virtual environment. And again, this isn't like the stereotypical metaverse in the sense that where you put on a headset, but these online communities all live on the internet. And I'll speak for myself. I was much more a gamer in my earlier years. Some of these people that I played video games were like some of my best friends at the time, where I would after school, after high school, go play video games, chat, talk about my day. It was real, and it still is real for a lot of people. Burning Man's another great example. So this actually is a true metaverse, experience. In 2020, since they couldn't have Burning Man in the physical location and how it usually is in Nevada, they've pivoted to Altspace, as well as some other VR platforms, and they had a complete Burning Man experience for a week in VR. I actually recently connected with one of the team organizers spearheading this initiative last year and this year, and they said they had, usually Burning Man has about 20,000 people in person, and they said they got almost 80,000 people to attend Burning Man VR, completely free, virtual. Roughly, I want to say a sixth of those people were using VR headsets. We have to take the caveat that VR is still somewhat new to a large margin of the population, and it's only been recently that some of these headsets have become more affordable. I think the most affordable one right now is the Oculus 2, which is about $299. But what I found most interesting about that 80,000 number is that the guy said it was about 40% of those people were new to the Burning Man VR community. So I think just like the discovery audience aspect of people who've never interacted with your brand is just huge in this interactive environment. And then finally, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I'm a big fan of music events. I love live events. Like, music is like a little bit like entropy for me. But I also have to understand that that's part of, my reluctance, that music is changing for some people. So this is an example of a VR chat screenshot of people going to a nightclub. This is a real DJ, so that means that someone is wearing a headset, really DJing, doing this, live, and people partying in the background. And as you can see, you are able to take on any appearance that you want, which, leads to a whole other, like, I guess, philosophical conversation of like face-to-face time. It is still face-to-face time, because when you're in these spaces, you're still talking to people. It's your voice, it's your sound, it's your thoughts. but your appearance may be completely different. I can present myself as a robot, I can present myself as a fox, I can present myself as a human, et cetera, et cetera. But it just, the possibilities of this environment are almost limitless, which is quite riveting for people that maybe they're introverts, maybe, you know, it's different for everyone, but I think it's exciting. And then finally, you know, there's a huge conversation of whether the metaverse is going to take on a completely VR lane, or is it going to take an AR lane? And so the title of this talk is Mirror World. And my long-term prediction is that we are going to begin to mirroring our physical world in these virtual environments. And the way that we apply this to events is, let's say, for example, your conference is in somewhere like New York City. You obviously host your physical conference, but then you create an environment that looks very similar to either the hotel you're hosting the conference at or the city you're hosting the conference at, and you integrate the content within that mirror world. And the reason that I guess propose that this is going to be the future is because COVID changed the way that people interact with events. Some people no longer see it as necessary to travel for events. Some people say that you need to have that face-to-face time. But the reality is that for some people, traveling for events really is inaccessible. And as we continue to talk about environmental harm to the planet, as we continue to talk about accessibility and inclusion, this is a great way to make it more accessible to people around the world that may normally not be able to attend in person. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. You've given us a lot to think about. Anybody who has questions for Stephanie, please email me at tom@repcap.com. Stephanie, thanks again. You've really changed. You've given me a lot to think about when it comes to events content, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.